Boxing is often renowned to being a young man's sport, but there are some fighters that have defied these laws and had extremely long careers. Here are the 10 fighters with the greatest longevity in boxing history, in my opinion. Number 10, Jersey Joe Walcott. Walcott had an incredibly hard career and was poorly managed throughout most of it. On his way to the heavyweight title, he beat the likes of Joey Maxim and was robbed against one of the greatest heavyweights of all time in Joe Louis. But Walcott never made much money in those fights and wouldn't win the heavyweight title until he was 37 years old against the legendary Ezzard Charles. Number 9, Sugar Ray Robinson. The most dominant fighter throughout the 1940s and the 1950s, Robinson fought all of the great fighters of his time. It wasn't until his late 30s and early 40s in which he'd start taking losses, but in the first 150 fights of his career, he was the most dominant fighter in boxing. Number 8, Evander Holyfield. In his 20s, he dominated the cruiserweight division, and in his early 30s, he beat the likes of Mike Tyson. But Holyfield would box until he was 48 years old, and in his 40s, he fought the likes of James Toney, Chris Bird and Nikolai Valuev. Number 7, Sol Manby. He won the WBC super lightweight title in the early 80s, but was predominantly a journeyman throughout most of his career. Manby would box professionally until he was 60 years old, and he would only be stopped once. In his peak, he would fight some of the best fighters of his time, most notably Roberto Duran. Number 6, Floyd Mayweather Jr., one of the most dedicated athletes in the history of the sport and one of the greatest defensive fighters of all time. Mayweather took very little punishment in his career considering the amount of top-level opposition he fought. He seemed to get better with age and always found a way to win and was dominant in the pound-for-pound rankings in his late 30s. Number 5, Manny Pacquiao. Manny is the only man in boxing to be a world champion across 4 different decades. What makes Pacquiao's longevity so impressive is the fact that he was in so many entertaining and physically tough fights. Pacquiao always provided exciting fights, and in his 40s, at the end of his career, he scored one of his greatest wins against the undefeated Keith Thurman. Number 4, Roberto Duran. One of the most dominant fighters of all time for around 7 years at lightweight. He would move up and beat the greatest welterweight of all time and win the light middleweight title. Then in his late 30s, he would beat Iron Bartley for the middleweight title. But Duran wasn't done yet, and he would fight on for another decade, well into his late 40s. Towards the end of his career, he stepped in with the likes of Vinny Paz and Hector Camacho. Number 3, Archie Moore. One of the greatest punchers in history. His age was always a thing of mystery, but there's no doubts that he was active until his late 40s. The longest reigning light heavyweight in history, he stepped in with the likes of Rocky Marciano at 41 and Muhammad Ali at 48. Number 2, George Foreman. His legendary comeback was first seen as a joke by most people, but that wasn't until he stepped in with the likes of Tommy Morrison and Evander Holyfield that people realised he was still a genuine threat. At 45 years old, he became the oldest heavyweight champion in history when he knocked out Michael Moore. Number 1, Bernard Hopkins. A legendary career facing the best across multiple decades, he became the oldest world champion in history at 49.